In a world where love and betrayal collide, my life shattered in an instant. I caught my beautiful wife, her smile a cruel twist of fate, in the arms of another man. Rage consumed me as I planned my revenge, every detail meticulously crafted. That night, I became the hunter, and he the prey. Confrontations in dark alleys, the glint of fear in his eyes, my determination unwavering. This is my story, my vengeance unleashed. I was sitting in the driver's seat of the flatbed truck. I stared out the window at a small trailer not too far away. I had been sitting there for nearly 20 minutes, unable to think clearly. All I could think about were old memories. The place looked the same. There was the mailbox in front with the name Prentice on it. The driveway was empty now. My car was gone. If Heather still lived there, she would be at work. I wondered if I waited long enough, whose car would pull in after work. It definitely wouldn't be Drake's. He was too proud to come to this part of town. More likely, Heather would go to him anyway, and that thought sparked a little anger inside me. I almost left. Instead, I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do next. For the 100th time, I asked myself why I took this delivery. It brought me back here after leaving more than 2 years ago. I had left in anger, making a promise not to return. And yet, here I was. It was a foolish choice, and I was about to start the truck and drive away. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a swing set and a sandbox filled with colorful toys. It struck me hard, and I felt tears welling up, almost blinding me with the light dancing around. I thought about Polly, my daughter I hadn't seen for way too long. I remembered the last time I had been at that trailer I once called home. It was 2 years ago on July 3rd, the day before a big celebration. It used to be a day I looked forward to, but I had changed since then. Life felt over for me. But maybe it wasn't over for Heather. I tried to push that memory away, but sitting there, it came flooding back. It still hurt a lot. I remembered the fight we had about a party I didn't want to attend. That was the moment everything changed for me. I hadn't been back since that day. My name is Jesse Prentice, and I was married to Heather for 3 years. We lived in that small trailer, saving up for our first house. We had plans to buy a home as soon as we could. We chose a neighborhood called Cayman Estates, which promised many good things. It even had a small fake lake. We were drawn in by how nice it looked in the ads. We were young and in love. We watched the listings to see when a house would be for sale. When one popped up, we went to look at it with a realtor, dreaming and making plans. Heather was a registered nurse, but she wanted to work fewer hours. So she took a job as a receptionist at a local construction company. I was a licensed mechanic, working at the Ford dealership as a master mechanic. At 24, I was one of the youngest guys there, but I was also the only master mechanic fully trained by Ford. I could fix almost any car or truck, and because of this, I had a good job that paid decent money. Together, Heather and I saved a nice amount each payday. When I was younger, I did a lot of wild things. But when I met Heather MacArthur, I started to settle down. Heather was very popular and known as one of the prettiest girls in school. She was a cheerleader and dated all the star athletes. After high school, she had many older men chasing after her. I would see her out sometimes with some handsome guy. I didn't think I fit in that world. I met Heather by chance when she came in with her dad to buy a car. Her dad, Walter MacArthur, was very wealthy and well-known. He promised her a car for her birthday, and they were there to pick one out. I was on break talking to Harry, a salesman, when they walked in. Harry and I noticed Heather at the same time and both said, "Wow, look at her." It was cliché, but true. Harry went to help her while I stayed in the office, simply watching. She was stunning. She wore shorts and a loose t-shirt with tennis shoes. Her dad was dressed sharply, but nobody noticed him at that moment. Harry was a good salesman, and he focused on talking to her dad while I kept watching. They looked at a small red Ford Focus loaded with options. Heather looked it over, then seemed drawn to a Ford Mustang convertible. I watched as she leaned over to peek inside. I knew I couldn't let this chance slip away. I walked over and asked if she had any questions. She thought I was a salesman and pointed at her dad. "He wants to buy me a little sedan, but I love this one. How much more is it?" I told her it was about the same price, even though the Mustang had fewer features. I explained that the Mustangs were powerful and looked a lot cooler. I said, "Just tell your dad the price is the same and see what he thinks." She asked, "What's missing?" "You said it was stripped down." I pointed out that it didn't have power seats or fancy extras, but it still had everything essential: a radio, air conditioning, power steering, windows, and locks. I saw her deep in thought, weighing her decision. She glanced back at the Mustang, then looked at me and walked over to her dad. She said something while pointing at the Mustang and smiled. He smiled back. Then they went back to looking at the Focus. I felt a smile creep onto my face. The girl had good judgment, and it made me like her even more. I noticed her dad and Harry walking toward his office, so I moved to let them pass. The girl came over to me and said, "The Focus will be much better for me, and I like the extras. The convertible is nice, but not very practical." I agreed with her. We talked for a bit, and I finally told her my name and explained that I worked in the repair shop. She told me her name, and after chatting a bit more, I asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. That was the start of the best summer of my life. Heather and I went out all summer and continued into the fall. After high school, she chose not to go to college, but to enroll in a tech center for nursing. She fought with her parents about it, but she went on and got her license. After looking for jobs at hospitals and clinics, she opted to work for a construction company because it offered fewer hours and better pay. That was where I first met her. After 6 months of work, she took her car and clothes and moved into a small apartment with another girl. I spoke to her dad right before she moved. He said they were sad but understood that Heather wanted to be independent. She told him they had helped her a lot, and now she wanted them to spend money on themselves. I thought that was a lovely idea, and so did her dad, even though he was sad to see her go. While Heather and I were dating, we didn't become exclusive. I would have liked to, but she was just enjoying life. We had never taken our relationship to that level, even though we were close. She said she wasn't ready and wanted to wait until she was sure about someone. I wished that someone would be me, but I didn't say that to her. I asked her about other guys she dated, and she assured me that I was the closest to her. It made me happy, even if I had doubts. She told me many things that I sometimes found hard to believe. But it didn't matter. It was her choice. If it wasn't me, then that was how it was. Things changed about a year and a half later. By then, Heather and I had been dating for a while, and she seemed to be going out with other guys less and less. I was thinking about asking her to marry me, but first, I made an offer on a double-wide trailer in a nice park just outside of town. The place had paved roads, mailboxes, trees, and this trailer had a small porch with white railings and an awning. It was empty, and I really wanted it. I held my breath until my offer was accepted, and then I had my own home. The next Saturday, I moved my things into the trailer. With the help of a couple of guys I worked with, we finished in under 5 hours. I was now the proud owner of 136 Calvin Lane in Whirlwind's Trailer Park. I hadn't told Heather anything about my new place yet. This was part of my plan to ask her to marry me. That evening, I drove over to Heather's apartment ready to pop the question. As I pulled in, I saw her getting out of a car with Drake Cunningham, a guy from her work. He was important there, and I knew his dad owned the place. I stayed in my car and watched as they walked to her door. She had taken me up to see her apartment once, but she never let me go up again after dates. She said it wasn't all hers, and her roommate would get mad if she had guys there. She paused at the door, took out her keys, and said something to Drake. He shook his head and replied. She shook hers too and started to turn away. But then Drake grabbed her shoulders and pulled her close. I felt a surge of anger and almost jumped out of my car. But then I decided to wait and see what happened. She said something, and when he wrapped his arms around her and leaned in, she kissed him back. It wasn't a simple goodnight kiss. I watched as it went on and saw his hand slide down her side. She didn't stop him, and soon she turned in his arms, took her key, and opened the door. At that moment, I felt a strong desire to hurt someone, just like I was hurting. I wanted to ask her to marry me, and she was here kissing this guy, just like I thought she would, but with someone else, not me. I was almost to the door when she noticed me coming. She pushed Drake away and opened her mouth to speak, but didn't get far. I pulled Drake away from her, and before he knew what was happening, I punched him in the mouth. He stumbled back, grabbing his bleeding lip. Heather yelled at me to stop and rushed to comfort him. She knelt down in the gravel and cradled his head. I stood there furious and hurt, watching her care for him. That was too much for me. I reached into my pocket and threw the ring box at her. I was so angry and hurt that I didn't care about giving her the ring anymore. I just needed to throw something at her. The box hit her shoulder, fell, and I shouted out how close I had come to making the worst mistake of my life. I told her, "I hope you get what you want, Heather, but it's clear that it's not me." I turned and dashed back to my car, ready to leave. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped out of the parking lot. I drove back to my trailer and went inside. I sat in the dark, feeling confused, angry, and hurt. I spent the whole night trying to understand my life. How could I have been so wrong about someone? I thought she loved me just as much as I loved her. But what I saw didn't look like love. It looked like she was with another guy. There's no way she could love me and still be with him. When I finally got up, I walked to my bedroom and fell onto the bed, still in my clothes. I fell asleep quickly and was so tired that I didn't even dream. I woke up close to noon and looked at the alarm clock. I shrugged. It was Sunday, and I had nothing to do now that Heather was gone. I decided to get up, shower, change, and maybe see a movie. I locked the bathroom door and stepped into the shower. It was small, but enough for me. Right now, I just wanted it to be hot. I let the water run over my head and shoulders. I almost cried with relief. I hadn't realized how tight my shoulders felt. The warm water was working its magic on me. I leaned against the wall. I was so worn out. Suddenly, I felt a slight breeze as someone came into the shower with me. I tensed up and tried to turn around to see her, but the space was tight. She wrapped her arms around me and pressed her body against my back. I finally managed to push her away from me. I turned off the water and shouted at her, "What are you doing? I saw you with Drake. It looked like you were about to go upstairs with him. I was there, Heather. I saw everything." She stood there with a small smile, looking defiant. "No, you didn't," she said. "What you saw was me telling Drake that nothing would happen between us. He got mad and tried to force me, but I didn't let him. I wanted to open the door and get away from him when you came over and grabbed him." "That's not true, Heather. I don't believe you. It sure didn't look like that to me. He had his hands on you and you didn't stop him. You even held on to him when he kissed you. You're lying. Why not just tell me you wanted him? I would have walked away. It would hurt, but I would have done it." "You're wrong, Jesse. You need to understand that you're the only man I want. If I can't convince you any other way, then I want you to take me now. Make me yours, please, Jesse." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to accept her offer, but I remembered how important it was to her to wait for marriage. Still, I found it hard to believe what I saw that day. I didn't know if I could trust her anymore. Where had she been all night and that morning with him? I was torn inside. I looked down at her face. She was looking up at me with pleading eyes. This was a moment that could change my life. If I chose to believe her, I also took a risk that she might be lying. I thought about how my dreams for the future could change if I pushed her away. I decided to trust her. I told her I appreciated her offer, but I couldn't do it. I wanted to respect what it meant to her. She smiled and stepped back out of the shower. I heard the door close behind her. I was planning to ask her to marry me later that day. I hoped and prayed that I wasn't making a mistake. As I got ready to leave, a small voice nagged at me, asking where she had spent the night. I tried to ignore it until I got to Heather's place to pick her up. By then, it was too late. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. I tried to forget my doubts about her. We got married, and she moved into the trailer with me. We both worked hard and were doing well financially. We saved up for a house, but the down payment was more than we had. So we focused on saving more money. About a year later, Heather got pregnant, and then our daughter Polly was born 9 months after that. Heather worked until a month before her due date, and then she returned to work 6 months later, using daycare for Polly. We kept saving for our own home. I took extra shifts to reach our down payment goal. Polly was now 2 and ready for her own room. I was excited and let our realtor know we were close to buying a house. She promised to call when a new home was available. I was very tired from working so much, but I thought Heather would understand. We had a few arguments, but she usually saw my side because we were working towards something. She went out with her friends sometimes. I didn't really like it, but she gave me no reason to doubt her, and she usually came home early. That was how it was until the day before the July 4th weekend. I was exhausted from extra hours at work. All I wanted was to go home, take a long, hot shower, crack open a cold beer, and relax on the deck. All I wanted for the weekend was to be with my wife and child. Soon it would be Monday and I would be back to work, but it was all worth it. We were close to having enough money for the down payment on our dream house on Island Drive. This would be our first real home. We lived in a trailer before, which was okay, but this was a real house. It was a big goal for someone like me, a mechanic without a degree. Just a few more weeks and we could give the bank what it wanted for the down payment. It was almost 4 when I pulled into the driveway. I saw that Heather's car was already there, so I went inside. I called out that I was home. I heard the shower running, so I decided I could wait a bit. I grabbed a cold beer and went outside to my chair on the back deck. I took off my shirt and shoes, kicked back with my feet resting on the railing, and sank into the soft cushion. I let out a big sigh and took a long drink of my beer. It felt like paradise. I planned to stay there for the rest of the day. I was dozing off, feeling all the tension leave my body when I realized I almost dropped my beer. I woke up just in time and took another sip to stay awake. I was almost finished with my beer when Heather came out with 2 beers in her hands. I told her how much I loved her. As I took a beer from her and settled back, I noticed that Polly was missing. The quietness around me told me that Polly was not there. At that moment, I saw that Heather was all dressed up. I thought, "Where's the little one? And why are you all dressed up?" I had planned to relax this evening. I needed to unwind and rest before starting the work week again. Sure, the paycheck was good and we were saving for the house, but work drained me. Heather stood there, beer in one hand, looking frustrated. I didn't know what I had done wrong, but I knew I had to listen to her. She opened her mouth a few times before finally speaking. "I sent Polly to my mom's for the night. She'll keep her until tomorrow. We're going to a party. The company is holding a gathering in Tom's Park for the fireworks, food, and drinks. We need to hurry to get good seats for us as employees. So get ready," she said. I shook my head. "I wanted to stay home tonight. That party is full of your work friends and I don't like them. Why would I go when I told you I wanted to stay home and relax with you both? You never want to go out anymore. You only want to work and avoid us. We hardly see you, and when we do, you're always too tired. We haven't spent time together in weeks. I want to go tonight and I will, with or without you. I'd rather be with you. But if you want to go, then go alone. Not with that crowd, especially Drake. I'm not doing that. But we can still go out, just not to that party. Why not have dinner and watch the fireworks by the river like we used to? No, I want to be with my friends tonight. Drake might be there, but it doesn't matter. I just want to have fun. Now let's go. If you want to come, fine, but if not, then don't." I felt my anger rising. If you choose to go alone, then go. I might just stay here, enjoy my beer, and sleep on the couch. Do what you want. Heather walked away down the path. I heard her van start and drive off. I let my anger keep me outside, alone with my beer. I sure wasn't going after her. I was not about to hang out with that guy Drake and his friends, who I didn't like at all. Just because he was the boss's son didn't impress me. He seemed to think he could flirt with Heather, even if she was married. I went inside and saw it was past 5 o'clock. I set my beer aside and looked for something to eat, but food couldn't fill the emptiness I felt without my wife and child. I hated being away from them even a little bit. This night was not going to be as relaxing as I had hoped. I found the couch, lay down, and fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of fireworks well after 8:30. I was still alone. I took the shower I had wanted earlier. After I dried off, I decided to head over to Towner's Bar and grill. I figured that's where everyone would be after the fireworks. It was where people went for beers, dancing, and sometimes to find someone to be with. The thought of Heather dancing with Drake made me uneasy. I knew I needed to show up. I put on some comfortable pants and went to the place. It was almost 10 when I arrived and walked towards the front door. I saw Janie Cummings and her husband leaving, so I stopped to say hello. I liked both Jake and Janie. We had enjoyed many barbecues together. "Hey, how's it going? It's been a while. We should have a cookout soon." Janie looked at Jake, and I noticed something in her eyes that made me uneasy. I didn't like that look at all. "What's going on? Is there something I should know?" Janie gave a small nod to Jake, who then spoke up. "Jesse, you need to go inside now. Drake is making a big move on Heather, and she isn't pushing him away like she usually does. We tried talking to her, but she's just not listening. Be careful. Drake has his friends with him, and they are keeping her friends away." "Thanks, Jake. I will," I said, starting to walk away from them and into the place. I looked around as I stepped onto the dance floor. To my right, I noticed Drake sitting very close to Heather in one of the booths. I could see his arm under the table, and I knew where his hand was. Heather looked uneasy, a sign she had probably drunk too much. I walked over, stopped at their table, and called out to her. "What on earth are you doing sitting with this guy? Come on, let's go home." I didn't know what I was expecting, but Heather just smiled at me. As I tried to pull her away, two guys grabbed hold of me, one on each arm, pulling me back. Before I could react to Drake, he hit me right on the chin. Everything went black for a moment, and my knees buckled. I was held up by the two guys. I staggered back, taking them with me. Heather was watching, but she didn't say or do anything. I remembered seeing a tiny smile on her face just before I lost sight of her. As the darkness faded, my anger took over, and I fought to break free. Drake came closer again, and I decided to wait. As he was in reach, I let my weight fall and kicked out at his face with everything I had. I felt my foot hit him, and it made me happy. But then, another guy stepped in, and the punches began. They kept coming at my face until everything turned dark again. When I woke up, I was in my car with the engine still running. My face hurt all over, and I was covered in blood. I had some sore ribs, and my stomach felt tight from where fists had hit me. Looking towards the bar, I spotted 4 guys standing there watching me. One guy was by my car, and when he saw me, he said, "Just get out of here and don't come back. Your wife is with Drake tonight. You'll get her back tomorrow, but if you come back, we'll make you regret it. Think about it." I really wanted to go back and confront Drake, but I knew it would be a bad idea. Those 5 guys were waiting for me, and I had no way to win. Drake had control over them, and they would do whatever he wanted. I tried to open my car door, but the guy pushed it closed again. He leaned in and said, "Think before you decide." I waited a few minutes longer before driving away. I had no choice. At home, I showered to wash off the blood and dirt. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a bruised face with one eye swollen shut and my cheek twice its normal size. My whole body hurt, but I was still alive and standing. In the living room, I sat down and thought about my night. I had told Heather before that I wouldn't go to any of her parties because of Drake and his friends. She had always understood that before. I had also said I wanted to stay home tonight because I was so tired from work. She agreed with that too. But tonight, when I expected her to keep her promise, everything changed. She went out with Drake, a guy I really didn't trust. When I tried to bring her home, she didn't help me. Instead, Drake's friends dragged me out and beat me. My anger grew as I thought about what happened. I felt furious at both Drake and Heather. I wanted to hurt Drake, but I didn't want to hurt her. I thought about what I could do next. I could get my gun and go back to take revenge, but that would land me in jail for a long time. So that was not an option. I could sneak into Drake's house later and hit him with a bat while he was asleep, but I knew he had a good security system, so that wouldn't work either. In the end, I could just wait until Heather came home. I thought about ending my marriage. At that moment, it felt like the best choice, but it still had its own problems. First, I would be the fool everyone talked about in town. Second, her family had money and I didn't. If we divorced, I might lose everything we had, including custody of our daughter, Polly. I couldn't let that happen. The thought of staying here, knowing everyone would see what happened, was too much. I felt so embarrassed because of my wife and that guy. Divorce was not an option for me right now. I was still trying to figure out my next step when I saw the sun coming up. She had spent the night with him. There was no call or message from her. If she had been anywhere else, she would have reached out. I now knew what she had done. It hurt that everyone in this town had let it happen. Not one person helped me. It was clear that Drake was in charge here, and I was nothing to everyone, even my wife. Now that she had made her choice, I could see my path. Without even thinking, I decided to pack my bags and leave this town. I wouldn't divorce Heather because that would let her be with Drake, and he might take Polly from me. That could never happen. If she wanted him, she could have him. They would have to live knowing they couldn't marry. As long as she was still my wife, Polly would stay my daughter. I might not see her, but I would never abandon her. I would leave all the money we saved for a house with Heather so she could take care of our daughter. All our money was in joint accounts, so she could use any of it. Once I settled down, I planned to send half my paycheck to Heather every month for Polly's needs. Some people might think that was odd, but to me, it was the only way to show I was not leaving my family without support. If Heather wanted to file for divorce, fine, but she couldn't say I was a bad father. If she did file, I would fight for custody because she had cheated on me openly. No matter what, I would do my best for Polly until she was old enough to take care of herself. An hour later, I drove past the city limit sign and I was on my way. I was hurting. My heart was broken and my thoughts were racing, but I would not stay and be embarrassed by my wife in front of my little girl. Heather had made her choice last night and it wasn't me. Now I was making mine. I was leaving her, and what she did would be something she had to explain to our 2-year-old daughter. Let her try. I drove for most of that day and stopped at a small motel to rest for the night. The next morning, I kept driving and went all day too. My body hurt and my head was pounding. On the second night, I found a roadside park and slept in my car. It was uncomfortable, but I saved a little money that I might need soon. I was far away from where I had been humiliated. When I reached a fairly large town, I felt this was far enough. I found a free clinic and got checked out. I still had my health insurance from work and I used it. The doctor said I had a mild concussion and 2 cracked ribs. The rest were bruises and sore muscles, but luckily I was going to be okay. I jokingly asked why that was good news and he laughed. He advised me to take time to heal, but I needed to find work, so I asked him about jobs for a mechanic. He gave me a name and I followed up on it a few days later. I was lucky and got a job with a car dealer named Josh Fields. I felt better when I found out he bought and sold nice cars, getting them ready to sell for a good price. Most of his cars came from Europe or Asia, where he saved on import fees before selling them in the U.S. He made a lot of money, and as soon as he saw I could do more than just fix cars, he started giving me more work. He paid me well, and I was happy with it. I was able to help him make even more money because I knew the best ways to get things done. We got along well, and I began to enjoy my job. At the end of my first month, I took my paycheck, cashed it, and kept a third for myself. I put the rest in an envelope and addressed it to Heather Prentice at our old home. I drove 100 miles out of my way to mail it, so no one could trace it back to me. I just dropped it in a mailbox and left. I continued to do that every 2 weeks for the next 2 years, sending more money each time. No 2 envelopes were sent from the same place, so it was hard for anyone to find me. I didn't want to be found except for the first letter I sent. I never included anything but cash. My first envelope had a note with my name and my reasons for leaving. I made it clear that the money was for taking care of Polly. After that first letter, I said nothing more. I found a nice place to live near work, which I could afford. It had a small kitchen and everything I needed to be comfortable. I moved in and started my new life. I slowly furnished it with things I found at garage sales and ads, and I was happy with what I bought. I ended up with a cozy little place that was just right for me. The only thing I carried with me from my past was my desire to make things better. I could still remember the night everything went wrong. I remembered how I couldn't protect myself. There were 3 or 4 guys that night, but they were just ordinary men. They had no special skills when they attacked me. They had their fists and feet. But I wanted to make sure that if I ever found myself in that situation again, I would fight back and make them pay. So I joined a local gym for martial arts training. I told the teacher about my reasons and my goals. I started training hard from that day on. At the same time, I took courses that my friend Josh suggested. They were all about working on cars, and I soon realized that there weren't many differences between his cars and regular American cars. Just a few small things that didn't matter much. Most of the talk about differences between European, Asian, and American cars was just hype. If a car was foreign and cost a lot, people thought it had to be better. But that wasn't true. The parts were more expensive, but they were made by the same companies that made cheaper parts. Knowing this helped me save Josh money by using the more affordable parts that worked just as well. Over time, Josh and I became good friends. He started to trust me with deliveries. I talked to the buyers and showed them how to use their new cars well. They liked me and began asking for me. I enjoyed talking to them and sharing about their new vehicles. All of us gained from it. It was a good deal for Josh, the customers, and me. I met many nice people during my 2 years there. Some became friends, and I started to socialize more. There were a couple of nice bars and grills where I went with friends. I noticed that many girls regularly visited those places. One place I liked more than the others had a group of girls that came in a few times a week. Until then, I had stayed away from dating. But I was a man, and I started wanting some company. After seeing them there a few times, I introduced myself to a girl I liked. Her name was Shawn. She had beautiful red hair, pale skin, and bright green eyes. She was attractive, with long legs and a tiny waist. I asked her to dance, and she said yes. We found out we had a lot in common. Both of us had partners who caused more trouble than happiness. Shawn wasn't divorced, but her husband had left her for another woman, and she was waiting for the legal time to divorce him. She said she had a few months to go. I shared that I was separated and didn't plan on going back. Eventually, I told her about my past and why I left my partner. She listened and understood. She then introduced me to her 2-year-old son, Bill. We began to date frequently, and things got serious. I was happy with Shawn and her son, and our relationship grew naturally. I knew I would have to make some choices soon, but for now, I was content. We talked a lot and spent time together, and we both knew we wanted to share more than just talk. When we did, it was sweet and special. As we lay together, holding hands, we agreed to keep seeing each other. We didn't know where it would lead, but I was open to trying. We started spending most of our time together, and I grew close to her young son. She would stay over whenever Billy was with a friend for a sleepover. Those nights were among the best I ever had. We would be together, talk, be together again, and fall asleep in each other's arms. I had never felt this way about anyone else before. Once, while returning from a night with Shawn, I realized my relationship with my ex was over for good. A few weeks later, Josh had a buyer for a Mercedes sedan he had imported from Germany. I checked the car and found only a few small problems that were easy to fix. It had no air conditioner, which is common for German cars. I installed one, tuned up the engine, and checked all the important parts. Once I was satisfied, I told Josh it was ready. He asked if I wanted to deliver it myself. It would be a 3-day trip, and he wanted someone he trusted. There was a lot of money at stake, and I would bring back a cashier's check. I felt a bit lost since Shawn was away visiting her mother for a week. I missed her and Bill more than I thought I would, and I needed something to keep me busy. So I told Josh I would take the delivery, and he was happy. He even offered me a bonus, which made me more eager to do it. I didn't pay much attention to the delivery destination at first. I thought a few days on the road would be a nice break. But when I got the directions, I realized where I had to go. It was back to the town where my troubles began. Oh no. Did I really want to do this now? My life was almost perfect. I was happy with Shawn. I had a good job with a nice boss, and I had mostly forgotten the shame my wife brought on me. It seemed like it was time for me to return to the place where I felt hurt. More importantly, it was time to see my daughter again. I also realized I needed to get divorced from my unfaithful wife. The next day I set off. I wasn't sure how I felt. I took my time driving until I finally arrived at my destination. I found the place to drop off the car and met a man on the west side of town, a place I never visited before since I could never afford anything there. I recognized the man's name, but he didn't know who I was. His name was Carl Cunningham, and he owned the construction company where his son Eric worked. But he had no idea what kind of person his son really was. As I thought about it, I felt a rush of anger, knowing Carl likely didn't know much about his son's life and the trouble he caused. Carl had retired and left the business to his son Drake. I pulled into the driveway of a large house on a 25-acre estate, located in a neighborhood of fancy homes. I had to tell the gatekeeper who I was and wait while the big gate opened for me. I drove up the long driveway and stopped where a man was waiting. He introduced himself as the person I had come to see. I nodded and told him only my first name. He told me I could start, so I backed the car off the flatbed. Carl looked at it carefully inside and out. We took a test drive together, and I gave him the paperwork with all the details about the car. While he was reading the contract, he said he was giving the car to his son. "This is a thank you for all the help he gives me with my business," Carl said. "He's wanted a car like this to impress a woman, I think, and he plans to give her his old Mercedes." I listened, not saying much. The woman was married, but it seemed her husband had left her. Yet, Drake was spending a lot of time with her. I couldn't understand why he didn't try to find someone without all that baggage. I knew she had a child, too. I kept quiet and thought about the information I was hearing. "It's hard to understand some people," I said. "Why did her husband leave? I don't know." Drake claimed the man was a coward for cheating on her and running away. But Drake is a good guy. I thought he'd be good to her if she chose him. It was clear Carl didn't know how bad his son was. That made sense. It was too bad, really. Carl seemed like a nice man. And then it hit me. My wife was spending time with the man whose son was responsible for my problems. I nodded, agreeing with him and keeping my thoughts to myself. "Not my concern, sir. I just work on cars. I can't afford a nice one anyway." We wrapped up the deal, and he gave me a cashier's check for the full amount. After that, he took me back to my truck. I shook his hand and drove away. For no clear reason, I drove to my old neighborhood and parked my flatbed down the street from my old trailer. I sat there, unsure of what to do next. I had a lot on my mind. It looked like Drake was having a good time with my wife while I was gone. Maybe he knew how to win her over better than I did. Perhaps that night I thought she drank too much was just her doing what she wanted all along. Now, 2 years later, I sat looking at my past, trying not to feel overwhelmed. Seeing the toys and the swing set brought back painful memories that I couldn't shake off. For a few moments, I found it hard to breathe. My face felt hot and I was sweating. But slowly I began to calm down. I took a few deep breaths, closed my eyes, and concentrated on finding my calm. After some time, the panic I felt eased up and I felt almost okay again. Just then, I saw her van go by and then pull into the driveway. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was hers. It was the same old Toyota with the same license plate. I ducked down in the cab so only my eyes were visible over the dashboard. If she looked this way, she wouldn't see me. I watched as she stepped out of the van and hurried up the steps to the door, not glancing left or right. She seemed happy. I wondered where she was working now. If she was smart, she wouldn't have to work since I was sending her more than enough money to take care of our daughter. She opened the door and went inside, closing it behind her. I thought about driving away when suddenly her mother's Mercedes pulled up next to me. I watched as her mom stepped out and helped my daughter get out of the car. My daughter, Polly, excitedly ran to the steps, stood on her tiptoes, and opened the door to go inside. Grandma Grace watched her with a smile until Heather popped her head out and waved. Then Grandma got back in her car and drove away. I stayed in my truck for another 20 minutes, watching as Polly came out the back door to play on the swing and with her toys. After a little while, another little girl came over, and the two of them started to play together. I stood there amazed, watching my daughter. I realized I had missed her more than I thought. She was almost 4 now, but she seemed so different after the 2 years I had been away. How could I just drive off and leave her again? I couldn't do that. My eyes filled with tears as I felt a deep ache in my chest. I drove to the Motel 6 and got a room for the night. I paid in cash. No credit cards for me. I hadn't had one since the night I left. It was too easy to track. If Rick wanted to find me, I believed he would try. Maybe I would let him and his friends know I was back in town. The pain I felt was hard to bear. It was the loss of my daughter and my place in her life. I needed to do something to ease that pain. I sat in that motel room thinking about the past. All the moments of shame played over and over in my mind. With each memory, I felt my anger grow. I waited until around 10 that night, and then I gave in to my anger. I drove downtown to Towner's Bar and Grill, where Drake and his crew were likely hanging out. I walked in, looked around, and saw Drake with a couple of his friends at a table in the back. A sense of excitement built up inside me, and it made the pain fade just a little. The bar was quiet that night, and that worked to my advantage. I approached the bar and ordered a beer. I watched Drake's table in the mirror behind the bar. I took small sips of my beer and waited. A few minutes later, someone walked up to Drake, pointed toward the bar, and said something. I saw Drake look over and smile. Now we would see what would happen. One thing I learned in martial arts is that patience is important. Also, anger can be a tool when used wisely. It's an advantage for those who can control it. I learned to control my anger from my teacher, and now I was letting it build. It had been growing ever since I heard his dad mention Drake and my wife. So I kept it simmering as I drove to the bar. Now it felt like a bright flame inside me. I poked at it a few more times to keep it hot. Just seeing Drake was enough to keep my anger alive. One of Drake's friends came over to check me out. I knew what I wanted to do and waited as he approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder. He spoke. "Hey, aren't you the guy who ran away a couple of years ago, leaving your wife and kid all alone? Chicken, right?" I didn't even put my beer down. I turned and smiled, saying, "You got me. What can I do for you, friend?" He laughed and strolled back to Drake's table. I watched as Drake got up and walked toward me. So far, so good. I set my glass down and got ready. I wanted to be in a good position when he arrived. I needed a plan. I turned to the bartender, someone I remembered from before. "Make sure you know who starts this. I don't want it to be me, and I need someone who sees everything, okay?" The bartender glanced at Drake and nodded. "I understand you, Jesse. Just be careful." I closed my eyes and let my training come to the front of my mind. My teacher always told me, "Don't think. Let your body remember." Now it was time to do just that. There were 4 of them and only one of me, just like that night when my life changed. I had focused on defense in my training. The goal was to react to another person's attack and use their anger against them. My teacher said I was good at this, and now I would see if it worked for real. By the time Drake and his friends got to me, I was seated quietly, my arms at my sides, back against the bar. My mind was clear. The fire inside me was hot. I waited, keeping my eyes on Drake. He stopped close and laughed in my face. Well, if it isn't the dog that ran away, letting me have his wife for the night. She was something, Jesse. You know it wasn't the first time for her, right? But since you ran away, I guess you didn't care. I wouldn't have let anyone have her if it was me. But you weren't here to stop me, were you?" I said nothing, just focused on him and his friends. The fire of my anger grew hotter, but I kept calm. I knew it would happen. Just give it time. I was aware that only one of Drake's friends was a real threat. The others would likely only join in when they felt safe. Except for Drake, I kept my eyes on that one person. My silence bothered Drake as I expected. He spoke again. "Why don't you go back to whatever hole you hid in for so long? We've been doing fine without you for a long time, and Heather seems happy with me. We're together now, and there's nothing you can do about it." I listened to him talk, and I started to feel that he was right. I felt like he was in charge here. He had no reason to lie and didn't need to worry about me. As his words sank in, I felt a fire inside me, burning out of control. With strong focus, I pushed that feeling down. Now it was time to take action. I wanted revenge, even if my teacher would not agree. I had dreamed of this for years, and now it was my chance. This time, I wouldn't walk away. I was going to finish what Drake started 2 years ago. I needed to press his buttons and wait for his reaction. I decided to hit hard and get this done. I put a sneer in my voice as I spoke. "I doubt Heather wants to be with you, Drake. She wanted more than you could give her. She knows class when she sees it. You're nothing, and she always thought you were a loser. She felt sorry for you, but she didn't really like you." I could see the anger growing in his eyes, and I waited for his reaction. Drake stepped closer, grabbing my collar and pulling me toward him. I let him pull me, and then I pushed away from the bar, sending him backward. He stumbled and fell hard on the floor, hitting his head. I stopped and waited. None of his friends moved right away. The fight happened so fast, and they looked nervously between Drake and me. 2 of Drake's friends helped him up. His face was red and he was breathing quickly, full of anger. I felt a rush of satisfaction. I knew this fight was going my way. Just a few more moves and he would be finished. But I didn't want it to end too soon. I planned to take him out quickly and then focus on his friends. I felt as angry with them as I did with Drake. They would face the consequences too. I relaxed my body and waited. Drake charged at me, rage filling his face, arms out to grab me. I turned to one side, grabbed one of his arms, and pulled with all my strength, throwing him off balance. He stumbled and crashed into the edge of the bar. His nose hit first, followed by the rest of his face. He fell to the ground, bleeding, and a bar stool tipped over as he fell. I could see his broken nose and a few missing teeth. I knew his shoulder was dislocated too, but I didn't look back. I focused on the others. One of his friends, who had threatened me before, rushed at me. He pulled back his arm to punch me. I remembered him and felt ready. He swung at me, but I dodged, grabbing his arm and twisting it while letting my legs go limp. His arm hit the edge of the stool, and I heard a loud crack followed by his scream of pain. Once he backed away, I hit him in the chest and kicked him in the groin, making sure he was out cold. I wanted him to feel the pain. I could have done worse, but I held back. 2 down, 2 to go. The last 2 friends were more careful now. They tried to surround me. They were scared but had nowhere else to go. I smiled at them and stood still, sensing the moment. I remembered my teacher's lessons and waited for them to attack. When they came at me, I grabbed their heads and slammed them together. They fell unconscious to the floor. I walked over to Drake and kicked him between the legs, even though he was out. It felt good to do that. I returned to the bar, picked up my drink, and took a sweet sip of beer. It had never tasted better. I wasn't even out of breath. The fight hadn't drained me at all. As I set my glass down, Jim looked at me in shock. "Jesse, I've never seen anything like that. How did you learn to do that?" Man, they never stood a chance. I felt a wave of anger wash over me, but it wasn't just about Drake and his friends. It was this stupid town, this ridiculous place that just stood by and watched. I turned to Jim, the bartender who had seen everything that night. My anger took over, just like me, here in this bar. Right, Jim? I never had a chance. Not one single person helped me. That includes you, Jim. Nobody even tried to stop it. Not you, not my wife, not even those who said they were my friends. That night, I told myself I would never let it happen again. And it won't. Tell whoever you want. If you come near me without my say-so, it could be the last thing you ever do. I'm leaving. Just tell the cops what happened and have the guts to be honest. You'd better do that, Jim. Because if you don't, I'll come back and you won't like it. Where are you going, Jesse? What should I say to them? How can they contact you? I'll be at the Motel 6 just down the street. I'm alone, but I'm leaving at dawn. So if they want to talk, they need to hurry. And remember what I said. Tell them the truth, or you'll find out I don't take kindly to those who try to mess with me. I walked out of the bar and drove back to my motel. I should have felt happy about getting back at Drake and his crew, but honestly, I felt nothing. Drake's words from that night 2 years ago about my actions and him claiming Heather was now with him hurt me. I thought I was over it. I thought being away from her long enough would erase the pain of her betrayal. But I was wrong. It still hurt, and his words hit me hard. My victory that night felt empty. I had replayed that night in my mind 1,000 times. Why did I choose to run away? I knew the reasons I told myself as I drove away from my shame. But did I really believe them? I questioned why I had given up so easily and never found a good reason in my own mind. The big one was that Heather betrayed me with the man I knew I couldn't stand. I think I knew that night that my marriage was over. Even if I had stayed, it was done. Another reason was that Drake and his friends were too many for me. But why didn't I stay and confront her the next morning when she came home? I did stay all night, and I was still there when the sun came up. When she didn't come home, why did I just give up? For the same reason I ran away. I really believed my marriage was over when she chose to be with Drake, and I could never forgive that. That was the truth. But that didn't stop the hurt of giving up my daughter. That was the hardest thing I ever did. While I sat there thinking about that awful night, someone knocked on the door. I thought it was the police and walked slowly to open it. Instead of a cop, I saw Jake Cummings. He waited for me to nod before stepping inside. I remembered he was the one who told me what happened that night before I went in to see for myself. He and Janie must have left when the trouble started, but I didn't blame him. At least he tried to help. "Hey, Jake, long time no see. How have you been? What about Janie?" I thought it was nice to be friendly. I was leaving in the morning and wouldn't have to see him or Janie again. "Wow, Jesse, I heard what you did at Towner's. Jim told me everything. He said you were staying here. Have you been home? Have you seen Heather or called her? She's been worried sick not knowing where you were. We all went nuts trying to find you. She even hired a private investigator, but he couldn't find you. Nobody knew what happened." I just stared at him. Why would I want anyone to know where I was? I drove for 3 days to get away and made sure no one could find me. Why do you think I would tell you now? I shook my head and smiled at his foolishness. I guess I had to explain it to him so he would understand a bit about my feelings. "What do you think, Jake? Did you think I would stay here after what she did to me with that jerk Drake? After he and his friends beat me up while everyone else just watched, including Heather?" I saw her smiling when Drake pushed me back. She seemed to enjoy watching me, her husband, get hurt. No thanks. That night I got the message that she and Drake would spend the night together, and he would bring her back in the morning. I made my decision right then. Forget her and forget this town. Nobody cared. They just let it happen. So let this town and my unfaithful wife have it all. If she wants to be the town's favorite for all I care, that's fine by me. I left, and I never regretted it once. I came back only to get the job done, and now I'm heading back to where I'm respected and have true friends. Jake listened and shook his head. I didn't know why, but I didn't care. I owed him for what he did, so I told him, Jake, you at least tried to warn me that night. You're the only one who did anything. So I listened to you. But now I need you to leave me alone. Thanks for what you did, but good night. Jake stood in front of me and refused to move. I was getting angry and I didn't want to hurt him, but I was finished with this. I started to point toward the door, but he sat down and said, No, you have to listen to me first. I have something to say and I'm saying it, even if you have to kick me out. I'm not going to do that, Jake. I don't have anything against you. Just say what you need to say and then go. Fine. That night, when Drake and his friends started bothering you, Janie and I tried to get Heather to come with us to keep her away from him. I was ready to drive her home, but she wouldn't come. Heather told Janie that she wanted to find you and make Drake let you go. She went back inside, and that was the last we saw of her. The next day, we drove to your place and found the trailer empty. You must have left already. But Heather was nowhere to be found. We called her phone, but there was no answer. We spent most of that afternoon looking for her, but didn't have any luck. Later that night, we went back to the trailer and found her there. Everything became a mess the next day when Heather couldn't locate you. She called everyone in town and they all tried to find you. But no one could. Heather was very upset. She was almost in tears, and it took days to calm her down. Eventually, we took her to the hospital. They kept her for a few days because she was so tired and sad. I was surprised they kept her, but it didn't change how I felt about what happened. I could believe Heather didn't think I would run away, but she also didn't know me well enough to expect anything different. While all of this was happening, she was the one who went out without me and made it clear she would do what she wanted. She chose to spend time with Drake that night. That thought brought me back to reality. It reminded me that she wasn't the sweet person Jake thought she was. When Heather finally left the hospital, she quit her job at the construction company. She told us she had filed a complaint against Drake and he gave her money to drop it. He wanted to keep it quiet from his dad. Heather decided to accept the money, but only if he left her alone. Then she took a job at the hospital. Even with everything going on, she never stopped trying to find you. We all felt guilty for not doing enough that first night to help her. Heather knows you're back because I called her after Jim talked to me. She was excited and wanted to see you, but was scared to talk. She knew she messed up that night, and she felt responsible for making you leave and for what happened to you. I understand how you see it, but you have to know that you're only partly right. She did go out without you and ended up in the bar with Drake, but a lot of that was just bravado. She said she didn't plan to stay with him, and when you showed up, she was going to stand up for you. But Drake took control. When the fight started, everything fell apart, and you were gone before she could act. He looked a little uncomfortable as he wrapped up his story. He couldn't look me in the eye as he finished speaking. Heather never told us where she went that night, and she never confessed to anything. But we chose to believe her. Jesse, we think you should too. Jake stood up and moved toward the door. I don't know what to tell you, Jesse. I know Heather loves you and misses you, and so does Polly. It's your decision now. I wish you luck, my friend. I walked him to the door. I hear what you're saying, Jake. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but she made a choice that caused all this to happen. She knew what could happen if I showed up, but she still went out. What she did led to everything, and I won't blame myself for it. I was working towards a goal that was important to both of us. She knew how I felt about Drake and his friends, and that I wanted nothing to do with them. Instead of trying to work it out, she went against my wishes and chose to go out with another man. She drank too much and knew what might happen, but did it anyway. Please don't try to make me the bad guy here. I can't fix this. Jake looked at me sadly for a moment and added, Whatever you decide, Jesse, I'll support you. You know her better than any of us, and she made a huge mistake that night. Maybe you're right. She did betray you. I can see your point, but Janie couldn't see anything wrong with Heather. You're the one that must make the right choice, so just be careful and choose what's best for you. Jake looked at me one last time before opening the door and leaving. The sound of the door closing echoed in the quiet room. I sat down on the bed and put my head in my hands. Jake was right. I knew it. But my anger didn't go away just because of his words. I was still furious with her and what she had cost me. I wasn't sure if I could ever get past that. I had no desire to return to this town where Drake and his family held so much power. If I did go back, it could lead to trouble. Someone could get hurt. Maybe even me. I glanced at the clock and saw it was almost midnight. I was still fired up from the fight earlier and wanted to do something. I stood up, thought for a moment, then decided to take a drive by the old place where we had wanted to buy a house for us and future kids. I smiled to myself as I remembered those silly plans. We would decorate the house the way we liked, fix up a room for Polly and another for a baby. Heather had already picked out the colors, and I had my eye on a mower and tools that every homeowner needs. Those dreams we had were all gone now, all gone because she chose to go out that night with her friends. All gone because she wanted to be with him. All gone because Drake Cunningham was a bully, and Heather chose him over me. As I drove to the neighborhood where we hoped to buy our first real home, tears began to fall. The excitement I felt earlier was gone, and now the sadness rushed back, just like that night when I drove away. I had to pull over for a bit until I could stop crying. I needed to do this, even just for closure. People always say you need closure to move on from tough times. Once I calmed down, I drove through the gates shaped like big waves. The gates reminded me of the comforts of the islands. The neighborhood was almost finished, with houses all around, lights shining warmly as tired workers returned home. I drove slowly, picturing men in their yards and women chatting over the fences. I imagined kids running and playing until their parents called them in for the night. It was all how we had pictured it before everything fell apart. Now, that dream was gone for us, and maybe for this neighborhood too. I stopped at the end of a cul-de-sac that led to a small park and thought about what to do next. This visit to old memories didn't help me move on. It only reminded me of what I had lost. I decided it was best to head back home. My home was now where I worked and where my friends cared about me. Sean was there, and so was her son. I knew she would stand by me. We were both hurt, and we understood each other. Neither of us wanted to hurt anyone else, but I still loved and missed my child, and nothing could change that. I had to accept that, but maybe today wasn't the right time. I put my truck in gear and drove out of the neighborhood toward my motel. I would pack up, pay my bill, and hit the road. I could be back by the end of the week and take the weekend to think about what to do. Maybe it was time to file for divorce and move on with my life. Let Heather move on with hers too. Drake had told me she was with someone new now, and maybe that was for the best. He could certainly take care of her and Polly. That thought made me more angry than relieved. I slammed my fist on the steering wheel, shouting, "No, this has to end now!" With that in mind, I turned the truck toward Heather's trailer. It was time to make some choices. As I drew near what used to be my trailer, I saw her van parked outside. I parked my truck down the street and turned off the engine. Now that I was here, all my old anger came rushing back. I took a moment to calm myself, thinking about how I was feeling. After a few minutes of being hard on myself, I felt a little calmer. I opened my truck door, stepped onto the gravel path, and made myself walk. I approached the steps and knocked on the door. This was no longer my home, but I had to try. While I waited, focusing on my breathing to stay calm, I looked at the small porch. It needed a lot of work. Paint, sanding, and fixing the planks. But that was no longer my job. Still, it stung to think that I had worked hard to make that place nice for Heather and my child. The door opened, and I saw Heather's mother, Grace MacArthur. What was she doing here? I was surprised, but before I could react, she recognized me. "Jesse, is that really you? Oh my God, Jesse, come in!" I stood there shocked, but Grace pulled me inside. I followed her into the small living room I had once been proud of. It had a pull-out and was wider than the trailer's usual space. Grace pointed to a chair and asked me to sit. I did, still trying to process what was happening. Grace had never liked me. Her husband, Walter, accepted me, but with some doubt. Grace always thought Heather married down and made sure I knew it, but now she seemed happy to see me. I wondered why she was here without her car, and with Heather clearly not home. "Where is my daughter?" I asked. I guessed Heather was out with her boyfriend, Drake. Grace replied, I assume she's helping him get better after his accident. I chuckled quietly to myself, remembering his crash at the bar. Grace turned a bit red at my thought. Well, that was how things were between us. Nothing had changed. I just wanted to see my daughter. If I could also talk to Heather about our divorce, that would be good too. I wanted to let her move on with her life. All I asked for was plenty of time to visit Polly. I didn't want anything more from Heather or the life we had together. That life was over, just like our marriage. Heather seemed to have moved on. Now it was time to make the divorce official. Heather called me earlier and asked me to wait at home until she got back. She said she would return around midnight. Polly was already asleep, and I sometimes took care of her at night. Walt and I both tried to help when we could. I was sending Heather enough money so she could hire a good sitter and find a nicer place to live. She did not need to ask anyone else for help. I was giving her more money than I ever made when I worked at the Ford dealership. Back then, with just my salary, we were doing okay. Heather's pay helped us save for a house, but we didn't rely on her wages to get by. Maybe she's living too well now that I'm not there. She always liked to go out. I remembered how her partying led to our problems and eventually made me leave. It seemed nothing had changed. I ran into Rick tonight, and he told me that he and Heather were together now. He seemed like he could take better care of her. Grace, her face was pale and her hands were tightly clutching her lap. She looked angry, and it showed. I thought too bad for her that Heather was her daughter, and that Drake, who was more to her liking, was in the picture now. She should be happy that I was gone. I chose to wrap up my talk with her, see my daughter, and then go. Talking to Heather now felt pointless and silly. I guessed she was much happier with that guy now. He had money and was important, which was more her style. That's what everyone kept telling me. I decided to peek in on Polly and leave. I walked quietly down the hallway to her bedroom. I opened the door slowly and peered inside. She was sound asleep, one arm hugging a blue bunny and the other resting on her pillow. Her hair spread out nicely on the pillow. I stood there, unable to move, simply missing her. Tears welled in my eyes as I watched her, not wanting to disturb this beautiful moment. I focused on her, unaware that Grace was coming down the hallway behind me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, and I did not move away. I didn't see the point. She told me that Polly missed me just as much as Heather did. Both of them cried for many nights after I left. I broke their hearts, and it took a long time for them to heal. I turned to look at Grace as she stepped back. Her face was tense, and she seemed determined to speak more. "You need to come back to the living room and talk with me, Jesse. After that, you can leave if you want. But if you don't listen, you will only prove what I think about you." She turned and walked away, and with one last look at my sleeping daughter, I followed her. I stepped into the living room and took the chair where I used to sit and watch TV. I relaxed and looked at Grace. I nodded, ready to listen. I wasn't concerned about what she thought of me. Grace could say what she wanted to say, and I would hear her out. She didn't matter to me anymore. "Say what you have to say, Grace. Blame me for everything if you want. That's fine. I don't care what you think now, just like before. I tried with you, but I wasn't good enough, so go ahead." Grace looked at me, her lips pressed into a tight line. "I need to tell you what happened that night. You don't know what Heather and Polly went through after you left. I will tell you the truth. At least you'll know what happened." "Fine," I said. "You're right. I never thought you were right for Heather. I always thought she would choose someone better. Drake had money, was well off, and his father was an important man. If he wanted to be with her, I would have accepted that. But she always said she didn't want him." I laughed a bit. She was right. He didn't want to marry her. He just wanted to use her. "Of course you would say that, Jesse Prentice. You have no respect for Heather. You never did." "I never respected you either. That's true. I thought you were too ordinary for her. I didn't bother to get to know you. When Heather decided to marry you, I almost gave up on her. It was her father who told me to hold back my judgment." "So I did," she continued. "I watched as Heather seemed happy with you. She loved you. When Polly came along, she was the happiest. For a while, I thought I was wrong about you. But then you left her and our grandchild. You just walked away. I was furious at you, and Heather was heartbroken. I tried to comfort her, but she pushed me away, telling me I didn't understand. And when I talked about you, she snapped at me, saying I couldn't speak about you. I just wanted to help. You left her and still she wouldn't let me say anything against you." I was shocked. I was starting to get impatient. This was what I expected. Grace wanted to blame me and didn't see why Heather wouldn't let her. I opened my mouth to say something, but she raised her hand and looked at me with real anger. "I know what you are going to say." Heather finally told me the truth and made sure I knew what really happened. "One night she came at me when I was really upset and talking bad about you. She told me what really happened. You stood up to Drake. When you hit him in self-defense, his friends attacked you. I didn't get the whole story until much later. One of Drake's friends mentioned that they told you he was taking your wife, and if you tried to stop them, they would hurt you." I was shocked by how much she knew. I thought nobody knew about it. The last part I heard was in a parking lot, away from others. I heard it, and someone from the gang might have bragged about it to someone else. But that didn't change what happened. The truth is, Heather caused all of this. She knew what could happen that night, but she chose to go out and have fun instead of caring about our marriage. Her choice meant I had to leave. The thought of her being with Drake was too much for me to bear. I couldn't stay in this town if that was the case. I don't know what happened after I left, but none of her friends could find her that night. She didn't come home until the next afternoon. Where was she? Who was she with? Did she ever tell you any of this? Grace looked surprised when I asked. Before she could think, she shook her head, saying she didn't know where Heather was all night. "Now you know the truth, Grace. Heather went out without me. She drank too much and ended up with Drake at that bar. When I showed up, she just laughed at me. I could have dealt with the beating, but feeling humiliated was too hard for me to take. I knew she wanted to stay with him that night, and I believe she did stay with Drake. It made me think of the night I proposed. After hearing what Drake said at the bar, I began to wonder if I had made a mistake that time. I suddenly saw it clearly. This same thing happened before. She spent the night with him and came back to me the next day, acting innocent. I thought Grace should hear about that too. Maybe I had been warned and didn't listen. I don't know if Heather ever told you about the night I proposed. I went to her apartment with a ring to ask her to marry me. When I got there, she was with Drake and they were kissing. He had his hands on her in ways that made it seem like she was okay with it. I got angry and left, going back to my trailer. It was just like before. The next day, she told me it was just her trying to make him leave her alone, and I believed her. I often wondered what happened after I left that night. I think I knew the truth, but I chose to trust her, and I married her. When I saw her at the bar that night, she was with Drake again, and all my doubts came rushing back. It felt like I was right about what happened that night. It seemed like she never got over him. Grace was shaking her head and smiling now. It looked like she had moved past whatever was bothering her. Maybe it wasn't me after all. "You're wrong, Jesse. Heather told me she didn't even like Drake that much. He chased her and she thought it was cute, but she didn't want him. She asked his dad to make him leave her alone and told everyone she wanted nothing to do with him. She made that clear to me too. You're wrong about them. There was nothing between Heather and Drake. Heather loves you, Jesse, and she won't forget you. She's really unhappy now, and she only cares about Polly. I've tried to get her to have fun, but when she goes out, she says she can't enjoy it. Sometimes I babysit for her, but she's always home early. She only goes out on the weekends, and then she's with the girls. She doesn't date, not that I know of. I know you've been sending her money every 2 weeks. It's enough for her to stay home with Polly, but she doesn't spend it on herself. She saves every penny you send for Polly's college fund. She lives on what she makes and hasn't touched any of the savings you both had." Grace stood up from the couch and grabbed her purse. "I'm going now, Jesse. You'll have to wait here with Polly until Heather comes home. I'll take the van and she can use the car tomorrow. She drives it a lot just to make sure it works and the brakes are okay. The van is pretty old. You kept it running all that time, but now it barely works. I don't know why she won't get rid of it, but it'll get me home. Good night, Jesse." Before I could say anything, she was gone. Now I had to wait for Heather to come home. As I watched her leave, I thought about what Grace said. I noticed many gaps in her story. First, the van was never a problem. I was good at fixing things. The van was fine when I left. It had a new engine, new brakes, and good tires. There shouldn't have been any issues since I left. The guys at the garage would have fixed anything for Heather. She didn't have to work to take care of our child. What I sent was more than enough, and I had been sending extra for Heather for the past year. If she was working and making money, she could easily buy a new car if she needed one. Working at the hospital paid better than a low-wage job. They were offering bonuses for signing up. Finally, Heather couldn't stay home anymore if there was a party somewhere. We argued about it often when we were married, and she had left with her friends more than once. Most of those nights didn't involve Drake and his friends, but some did. That night felt normal, except for Heather's reaction. I found it hard to believe that she wasn't still going out with her girls to have fun. What Heather did while she was out wasn't something Grace would know about, and it was something Heather wouldn't share with her. But with me out of the picture, there was nothing stopping Heather from enjoying the attention she always got from men. I wanted to have a talk with her about this. Now, it seemed my only choice was to wait until she was in front of me. I stood there trying to figure out how to talk to her, but nothing came to mind. So I decided to go down the hall to look at my daughter again. That was easy to do. She was my little girl, and I could look at her as much as I wanted. I heard the clock ticking in the living room. Tick. 1 o'clock. I went into the living room and sat down. There was no need to feel uneasy while I waited for Heather. Grace said she would be home just after midnight, but I thought to myself, that is, unless she decided to stop and see Drake. Now it was after 1 o'clock, and Drake was probably having a rough night at the bar. He might have even gone to the emergency room, which meant Heather would have to stay with him longer than usual. I had a hard time believing what Grace had told me. I couldn't imagine Heather not going out like she used to. After all, that was what led to where we were now. No, Heather loved to party, and I doubted that had changed. Chances were she was still seeing Drake and her mother didn't know. She used to brag about how well she could trick her mother when she was younger. Some things never changed. I was just about to find a snack when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out the window and saw her mother's car pull in, followed by an older Mercedes sedan. This was a new car, the same one I had delivered to Drake's dad just a few days ago. Heather got out of her mother's car. A big man got out of the other car, gave Heather something, probably keys, and then walked back to the other car. Heather waved to the new car, which then drove away. I saw her look around for the van, shake her head, and head to the door. Just seconds later, she came in. She stepped into the room, closed the door gently behind her, and stood there looking at me, shocked. I was taken aback by the changes in her since the last time I saw her. She was a few pounds slimmer. Her short blonde hair had grown longer and shone brightly. Her dress was much shorter and tighter than what she wore when we were together. She had that look people get after dancing and having a good time, sort of dreamy and unfocused. She used breath mints to freshen her breath before being with her mother. When I looked into her eyes, I could still see a glimpse of the lively girl I once knew. But this wasn't the Heather I had left behind. "Hello, Jessie. It's been a long time since you were here. How are you?" she said softly in a way I had never heard her speak before. This made me unsure of what to say. It was clear this woman was different from the one I left. She didn't seem sad at all. So much for Grace's claims. This was more like the Heather I knew before marriage. Could it be that she was not the same girl I left? I had to find out. But now, I needed to be careful. "Hello, Heather. I'm good, thanks. And it's been over 2 years since I was last here. The last time was the night you chose to go out with your friends without me. I'm sure you remember that night." She moved to the couch and sat down. She took off her coat and let it fall beside her on the couch. She wore a short skirt that reached just to her knees, a blouse that looked a size too small, high heels, and way too much makeup. She must have come right from a party. She looked at me and said, "Yes, Jessie, I remember that night. I remember it very well. In fact, I can't forget it. I see you when I close my eyes and I see them dragging you outside. That's all I remember before Jake and Janie pulled me out the back door." That was the first lie of the night. Now I knew how she was going to play it. My mind was made up. I thought I would encourage her to share more. Maybe a few details would help me understand what happened to me. "They handled me pretty roughly outside, Heather. The 4 of them. I got a concussion, some broken ribs, and internal bruises. I was hurt for weeks afterward. They knocked me out and put me in my car. They just stood there waiting for me to wake up. Do you know what they told me that night? I'll tell you the exact words. They never left my mind. They said, 'Get out of here and don't come back. Your wife belongs to Drake tonight and you'll get her back tomorrow. Tonight, she belongs to him, not you.' That's what they said, Heather. They warned me that if I tried to get to you, they would make sure I went off the cliff into the lake. That's what they told me. I guess I wasn't stupid enough to think about dying for you since you chose to be with Drake. So I went home and waited. And you never came home. No calls, no explanations, no pleas for me to come get you, not a word. By morning, I decided you had been with him all night. Since everyone saw what happened, I couldn't live with the shame. So I left. She had tears in her eyes when she listened to me. When I told her I was leaving, she broke down and cried. I watched her, unable to move closer. Her shoulders shook and her sobs filled the silence. She stayed that way for a long time before she finally stopped crying. She wiped her eyes and looked back at me. But I could see that her tears were not real. Her eyes shone with anger instead. Nothing really happened. Jesse, I only remember Janie pulling me toward the back while Drake and his friends pushed you out of the door. I was with Janie, and she and Jake made sure Drake didn't come after me. They stayed with me all night and into the next morning. I tried to call you all night, but you didn't answer. When morning came, they took me back to the trailer, but you were gone. I had no idea where you were, and I waited for you to come home, but you never did. Why would you think I would come home, Heather? You shamed me by going to that bar with Drake, sitting with him and kissing him. I saw where his hands were and the smile on his face when you saw me. It was a satisfied smile. I was so angry I could have harmed both of you. But Drake had to show off. That's when he and his friends took care of me. Just so you know, I didn't even leave until late the next morning. I waited all night for you. You never called, never came home. And you were with him all night. I spoke to Jake this afternoon. He said you wouldn't go with him and Janie. They didn't see you again until the next day. They even went to the trailer to look for you but couldn't find you. So much for your lies, Heather. I sat in our trailer, sore from the beating Drake and his friends gave me, waiting for you. I thought about the night at your apartment when I was going to propose. I realize now that I made a mistake by trusting you. I should have been more careful, but I loved you. I let my love for you blind me to the truth. Now looking back at what you did that night and what I saw years ago, I see that I was a fool. So I chose to leave. Oh God, Jesse, I was the real fool. I know what I did, and I will regret it forever. That night at the apartment, I was telling the truth. The only wrong thing I did was tease Drake a little by saying I was in love with you. I had no plans to take him upstairs. He had never been there, and I wanted to make sure he didn't go up this time. I had told him no, but I wanted to open the door just a bit to show him he couldn't get in. That's when you arrived. I let him touch me a little to make him less suspicious. That was my mistake, and that's what you saw. I swear all I said was the truth. And at the party, everything I did was wrong. I was angry and acted foolishly. I wanted to hurt you, but not by being with Drake in any way other than to make you feel jealous. I wasn't drunk, just a bit tipsy. I knew what I was doing, and when I smiled, it was only because I was glad you finally came to find me. But when Drake stood up and rushed toward you, I knew everything was going wrong. That was not my plan. I was so surprised I just sat there. I saw him swing at you, and I yelled at him to stop, but no one listened. Everything went chaotic, and the next thing I knew, I was back at home in my driveway. I spent the night with my parents. It wasn't until the next morning that I truly understood what I had done. You were gone. I realized what you must have felt. You didn't know where I was. The last thing you knew, I was still with Drake. It all hit me then. I knew I had pushed you away, and I had no idea how to reach you. I looked for you for months, but never found you. Polly cried herself to sleep for weeks, and I couldn't comfort her. What could I say? That I caused her daddy to leave because of my foolish actions? I had no words to ease her pain or to comfort myself. All I can say to you now, Jesse, is that I never betrayed you. I never stopped loving you. During this time, I have not been with anyone else, and I never will. My life without you is only about our daughter. All the money you sent is saved for her. All our savings are still safe. I haven't touched anything of yours since you left. I stayed here at our home, waiting for you to return. Now that you are back, I have said everything I need to say. It's your turn now. If it helps, I just want your forgiveness and for you to come back to me and our daughter. That's all I've wanted since you left. I will never make the same mistake again. I promise you that. I sat there, shocked at the lies this woman told me without a second thought. All lies, denying what I now knew was true. Heather had spent the night with Drake, at least 2 times I knew of. The night I almost proposed and the night of the party. There were probably many more times I didn't know about. And Heather, despite her charm and love for fun, was a skilled liar. The story she told that night was filled with one lie after another, all told with a straight face. She twisted the truth to make me believe her, just like she did years ago. That's one reason I chose to believe her all those years ago. Heather did what she wanted, making the choice to be with Drake and drink too much. She expected me to come to her rescue with no consequences at all. When I finally showed up and everything went wrong, she took the chance and spent the night with Drake. I always knew she had feelings for him, but I also knew he wouldn't make a good husband. So she decided to be with me. But when the excitement wore off, she found a way to have both. She did just that. The result? I got hurt badly and ended up leaving her and my child. But didn't she pay for what she did? I found a new life with good friends and a job that paid well. I hadn't planned on looking for another woman, but then Sean came into my life. I thought I would see where it went once I finished things here. Now I was certain about my choice. Heather was still my wife, but she lied when she had the chance to be honest. Her apologies meant nothing to me now, and I didn't believe her when she said she wanted me back. She should know that wouldn't happen. I was not coming back. I would never live in this place where Drake and his like did whatever they wanted. I was also sure about her relationship with Drake, both in the past and now. She said nothing happened between them, but I didn't believe her anymore. I caught her that day, and I felt like I stopped her before she could go off with Drake. But she disappeared that night and most of the next day before coming back to me. When I asked her about Drake, she said nothing happened. But I no longer trusted her. And what about all the time I was gone? Had she ever been with him during that time? The car she drove home seemed to tell me the answer. I decided it was time to end this without any more lies. I wanted to be clear. Heather, the car you brought home tonight is Drake's old car. He gave it to you. The car I returned to Drake's father just this morning was the one that waited for the other driver. His dad told me Drake was with a woman whose husband left her after cheating. Her eyes widened, and she started to speak. Now that she knew I knew about Drake's gift, I waved my hand in front of her face to stop her from lying. On both nights you claimed you were with someone else. You were with Drake. The night I almost proposed and the night of the party. Even your mother didn't know where you were on the night of the party. She never knew about the night I wanted to propose either. I met her today and she believes your lies like many others in town. But if you were with her that night, why didn't she tell me about it today? Because you weren't with her. You were with Drake. Who knows? His friends probably also got a turn. You claimed to care for me when they pulled me out of the party. But you never called. Not once. Neither my cell nor the home phone. So much for your concern and love. Why keep lying, Heather? Just let it go. I know I made a mistake marrying you, but I am truly over you. What's that saying? Once a cheater, always a cheater. Now she had real tears as I threw her lies back at her. I could see her surprise change to fear and then real pain and tears. She knew it was over. Now why she cared was beyond me. But I had to ask, why are you crying, Heather? It ended that night. You chose to cheat on me in public. You had to know that. You must have known. You kept it secret before that. And I never suspected. I didn't want to believe you could do something like that. But that night, you had to know I could never accept you with him or any other man. You must have understood that. I'm sorry, Jesse. I was so upset that night and I couldn't stop myself. I drank too much and I made a dumb mistake. That's all it was. I swear. Drake doesn't mean anything to me. You're the only man I ever loved. You have to come back and forgive me. No, Heather. I don't have to do anything. I owe you nothing. It was not just a mistake. It wasn't the first time you were with him, even before we married. And you probably never stopped. Now I wonder if Polly is really my daughter. I don't know anymore. Your lies, deceit, and how you looked down on me are too much. Please, Jesse, you can't believe any of this. Polly is your daughter, and you can't doubt that. And you're wrong about Drake. I don't love him. I'm not with him. He helped us out with the car, and I've never been with him. You're wrong. You're wrong. No, Heather, I'm right. You've told me too many lies. Me, your mom, and others. You lied to everyone. I believed you, and that was my mistake. You loved to party too much, and you couldn't stop. Drake had money and he bought you things. You were with him the night I wanted to propose. Then you came back to me the next day and made me believe you were still a virgin. I should have known it was all a lie. But I loved you then, and I would have believed anything. But now I see the truth. You cheated on me before, and you never stopped. Now it doesn't matter. I'm done. I'll be gone tomorrow. You'll be free. I'll file for divorce as soon as I get back. I will also get a DNA test to check if my daughter is really mine. Trust me, Heather. If that test fails, I'll sue you for parental fraud. Heather was shocked as everything unfolded. I wondered why she still wanted me to stay. Did she really love me as she said? It seemed she at least thought she did. But it wasn't enough to keep her loyal. She had to be with Drake. He was rich, a charm, and someone who didn't care about rules. They were alike and deserved each other. I'll give you everything, Heather. My savings, the money I sent you, the trailer, and anything else here. Take it all. It means nothing to me now. I just want to forget you and what we had. It was all a lie and not worth remembering. The only thing I want is time with Polly. If you try to stop that, I will do everything I can to make things hard for you and Drake. I'll agree to pay for child support, but not any money for your living. I will not give you a single dime to spend on him. I hope you both suffer for what you've done. Just call me and I'll pick up my daughter. I would gladly take her now if you want. She will only get in your way. Party girls don't need anyone holding them back. I was done. I had said my piece, and it felt like a heavy load had been lifted from my shoulders. I felt light and happy. Sean and Billy were waiting for me, and I couldn't wait to go back. I looked down at Heather, who was still crying. I wanted to leave, but just as I began to walk away, I heard a small voice. "Daddy, is that you?" I turned and saw my daughter standing there, thumb in her mouth, looking at me with wide eyes. I smiled at Polly and said, "Yes, sweetie, it's Daddy." "Hi, Daddy. Are you coming home to live with us again?" I looked at Heather, then back at Polly, and made my choice. "No, Pumpkin. I'm leaving tomorrow, but I will come to see you as often as I can. Would that be okay?" "Why can't you come home again, Daddy? I want you here with us." "Your mommy and I aren't going to be together anymore, baby. Mommy has someone else she wants to be with, so I have to go back to my life and be with the people who care about me, just like she cares about you." Heather had tears in her eyes as she spoke softly. "That's right, honey. Daddy has someone else now, and he must go back to them. But you'll see him very often now. He will come to see you as soon as he can." She stood and looked at me one last time. I felt a pull of the old feelings I had for her. How could these feelings fade so quickly? I was still a human with feelings that would take time to heal. But now I had someone else to help me, and I was eager to return to her. I walked over and hugged Polly. I was amazed by how small she felt in my arms. She hugged me back as if she was afraid I would let go. She whispered in my ear, "I'm so sorry, Jessie. I was wrong, and I am paying a high price for it. Can you ever forgive me?" I replied, "I can't forgive you for breaking my family and my bond with my daughter, but I will be polite to you. Just know that when Polly is old enough to understand, I will tell her how you hurt us and how you ruined our family." I pulled back with a smile and said, "Just take care of yourself and our daughter. I'll send everything to you as soon as I can, and I hope for the best for you. Never forget that I loved you with all my heart once. I would have done anything for you if you had just asked. But now it's too late." She looked shocked but still said, "I know, Jessie, and I don't know how I will live without you. These last 2 years have been very hard for me. I thought that since we hadn't divorced, there was still a chance for us. I never stopped loving you." "Jessie, Drake is just a distraction, nothing more. He loves me, but I never loved him. And Polly is your daughter. Don't ever doubt that. I swear to you, you are her father." "Thank you for that, but I won't just take your word for it. She is my daughter, and nothing will ever change that. Maybe you can let her come visit me. She would like Billy and Sean. They are waiting for me now." I let her go and leaned down to kiss my daughter. Then, with one last look around, I walked back to what was now my home. I sat in my car, turned off the recording on my phone, attached the file, and sent it to my ex-mother-in-law, Jake. So much for lies. I saw Heather standing in the doorway. I waved goodbye and drove away. My only thought was, "Sean, I'm coming home." Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.